Hello and welcome to all of my snail mail enthusiasts. I'm Lindsay Bugbee from The Postman's Knock, and I think my business name tells you everything that you need to know about how I feel about stamps and sending mail. So I often get questions about using vintage stamps for mailing envelopes. A lot of people think that you can't use them, but you actually can, and they can add so much to your mail art compositions. So especially if you have an envelope with plain lettering or plain calligraphy, you just put on a couple of stamps and immediately it is elevated to a work of art. So we're going to talk about where to source postage stamps, how to use them, and just some tips for ensuring successful delivery. The first thing that you'll want to do is actually find postage stamps. So there are a lot of places to get your postage stamp, and what I recommend if you're in the US is keeping a mix of modern stamps and vintage stamps on hand, because as postage is going up, as it does every year or in some cases every few months, it's becoming harder and harder to use vintage stamps to piece together a denomination that's appropriate for today's world. So what I like to do is have my modern stamps around. You can see I've got a couple of forever stamps here. And then I have vintage stamps, and I have a mixture of vintage stamps. You can have stamps that have not been canceled, meaning they haven't been used yet. There are no lines on them. And these actually count for whatever the stamp says it's worth. So this stamp says 13 cents. It's worth 13 cents. So you put it on an envelope, it builds in value up to what denomination you want it to be. Then I have my canceled stamps. So you can see, for example, that this stamp has been canceled. If I use this on an envelope, it is going to be purely decorative. And you can do that, okay? But you have to make sure that the good stamps, the unused stamps that are on your envelope, total the amount that you need to send your letter. There are several places to source postage stamps. My favorite place is eBay because it's easy to find unused vintage postage stamps, or it's even easier to find used vintage postage stamps, so the ones that have been canceled. And I have a little mix of both here. I prefer to keep more unused stamps than used stamps on hand. For curated collections that are more expensive, you can always look on Etsy. There are plenty of collectors who have pre-assembled little sets of 3 or 4 stamps for you that you can put on envelopes, and a lot of brides and grooms like to do that for weddings for a more polished and consistent look. If you get lucky, you might find some postage stamps at auctions. Maybe somebody has postage stamps that they're going to give to you that were just in storage. That was the case with these stamps. Somebody was kind enough to send those to me, and I absolutely love them. And of course, like I said, the USPS website is a fabulous place to buy current postage stamps. You can find a lot of cool designs on there, so don't overlook that. A postage stamp does not need to be vintage in order to be cool. I think as long as it has a neat design, go for it. So now the question becomes, how do you actually use your postage stamps? We all know that we can put one postage stamp on an envelope and it will look good, but how do you combine postage stamps? And in order to answer that question, I've got this interesting envelope here. So you can see that the orientation is different from what we're used to. We have this envelope that traditionally is oriented like this, but I've written the address such that it's oriented like this. And I've done that because I want to fill up the top with my postage stamps. So if I have a colored envelope like this, I like to pull in elements of that color. And I have these cool mariachi stamps, and it looks like this design features a yellow that's very similar to this. So the disadvantage with current modern postage stamps, and an advantage, is that they're sticky. So there's no way to lay out the stamps before committing to a position. So I'm just going to go for it and put this stamp here. Let's talk about cost too. So since this envelope is non-machinable since it has an orientation that is different from what the post office might expect. That requires a surcharge. So you need to include that surcharge if you have an envelope like this, or you have some sort of element on your envelope that makes it not able to go through the machine, like a wax seal on the back. So that non-machinable envelope fee, again, as of right now in the US, is 40 cents. So I'm looking at 60 cents for the cost, or 63 cents for the cost of sending the actual envelope. And then I need to add 40 cents to that. So I'm looking at what, $1.03 to send this. So I know that this is 63 cents. And then I've got these George Morrison stamps that have some yellow in them. So I'm just really leaning on this yellow. And we'll talk in just a moment, well, in a little bit, about what to do if you have a white envelope, because I'm just really liking this yellow right here. But what do you do if your envelope isn't colored? All right, so just with these two stamps, 63 cents plus 63 cents, I have surpassed what I actually need to pay to get this envelope through the post office. So now I can just play. And what I like to do is lay out stamps to see what's going to work best. And I'll speed up the video because this is a very therapeutic thing for me and I love to take my time. So I'm just going to play while you watch as I go quickly. Okay, I like that layout. So now let's talk about how to actually adhere the stamps to the envelope. Now, once upon a time, I remember when I was little, you could lick these stamps or moisten them if you were classier than I was, and then just adhere them to your envelope. But these days, most of the adhesive has actually worn off. So if I'm using vintage stamps, I almost always use a glue stick. So I take a scrap piece of paper and then I just stay faithful to my layout here. And of course we have the two modern stamps whose adhesive is reliable and those are already stuck on there. What we're focusing on is the vintage stamps. And sometimes you can get that moistened to seal glue to work. I just don't trust it because at this point, stamps that are moistened to seal are quite old and that adhesive just gets pretty weak over time. So it's better to glue because why not? And notice that in this stamp collage, I did not use any canceled stamps. I could have, but I didn't. So these are all valid stamps that will count towards the value of the envelope. But of course, the modern stamps make up the value. And then here, this strip was just cut from a stamp. I like to keep those kind of strips, like this one, on my stamps because you never know when you'll need it to fill up some space. So if you take those off, keep them someplace because you might need them. And then using this last one here. And all done. Now let's talk actually choosing the stamps to put together on any given envelope. I usually like to stick to two different themes, one of two different themes, either color, which I've done here, or content. So in this envelope, I made sure that every single stamp I used had some element of yellow in it, which tied it back to the original envelope that it's on. But if you're working on a white or beige envelope, color doesn't come into play quite as much. So for this envelope, the theme is cool colors. So you've got these cool purples, and then you've got the cool blues and a cool green. That's what unites everything there. For this envelope, it's all about Christmas. So that goes back to what I was saying about the actual content of the stamp and using that as a theme. By coincidence, all of these stamps have red in them, but they're also all Christmas themed. So you've got explicit Christmas here. You've got pears, which Harry and David pears every Christmas here in the US. And then the Poland's Millennium, okay, that's not explicitly Christmas, but you have to look close to realize that it looks very Christmassy. So think about that when grouping your stamps together. What sort of pattern can you make with your stamps? Like on this one, lots of brown in all of these stamps. So think about that, and in doing so, you will be able to create a cohesive stamp collage that's going to serve the envelope well. As far as orientation goes, I tend to have my stamps either all across the top or concentrated on the right, which I've done here. And this is the only one, I guess, in this batch where I've got everything on the top here. All of the other ones go to the right. But, you know, just play around with that and see what orientation works best according to how you have written the address on the envelope. I'm trying to think about what else you might want to know about postage stamps. One thing that comes to mind is people will email me and they'll say essentially, "You're crazy for using those stamps. They're worth so much money." They're not. I mean, the vast majority of postage stamps are not. My mother is an antiques dealer, so she'll tell you most of them, no, not worth much, just worth whatever they say they're worth. You know, this stamp worth 10 cents. If you're nervous though about a stamp that you're using, Google it. You know, if you want to make sure, Google the stamp. So I would Google Continental Marines 10-cent USPS stamp and see if that's absolutely blowing up on eBay. But you know, if that is a concern, then look it up for your own peace of mind. And if you happen to have a really valuable postage stamp, congratulations. And if you don't, also congratulations, because you can use it for cool projects like this. I hope that this video serves to cover any questions you might have about the artistic use of postage stamps. Of course, if you have any more, feel free to comment. I'm always happy to answer. Thank you so much for watching. Happy mailing, and don't forget to like and subscribe.